Good evening. It's Joyful Hermit again. I'm sort of on a roll. I can't do much writing because it's very difficult for me to coordinate. It's just so amazing what a neck does to us, and those muscles that go into the shoulders and up into the head, and how when they're injured, it's really affects the thinking process and the ability to have coordination with your muscles. Walk around and you suddenly start to get dizzy or turn your head and you're off balance, and it's just a strange thing, but I'm just so thankful to be starting to feel a little bit better and um, just getting through this. And part of it, I think, is helping to express myself more. I found another poem from that time period after my divorce in which I thought I was falling in love. And I don't want to ever come across as never having been in the wrong. I very much was. I was a very weak person. I probably still am, but I was very weak then. I had really been hurt so much by my husband leaving and finding out that he had been unfaithful all along with various women, and just he wanted a divorce, but yet he didn't stop harassing them then when we got it. And it was a very difficult time and very confusing. And I was also not, I guess, worldly wise with men. Maybe I never had been, probably not. And I got taken advantage of 2 or 3 times in a bad sense. One time I knew, well, it was this man that I thought I loved, and I didn't. As it turned out, it was just sort of a weakness of desperation to have someone care. And then later, the other time that I thought I was in love, I knew that that wasn't right, and nothing happened sexually with that. That was horrible, but it just wasn't right. And the first time, both times I would beg God, help me, get me out of this situation. And both times God did, but not easily, and it always involved pain on my part. It seems that through my weakness in various situations where I couldn't make the step myself, but knew that I wanted that step to be taken, and would try, and maybe like twice these 2 different men kept pursuing, and wouldn't leave me alone. And I would say, please don't call, or don't come visit, whatever. And they still would. And so finally I would just beg God, help me get out of this, save me. And the ways in which he did, one time was through more physical suffering. And another time, finally, I had the courage, and I drew the limits, but I had to keep drawing them to the point where I was outright rude. But that's what it took. Finally, I told this one, consider me dead. Do not email, do not call, do not visit, leave me alone. And it was hard, because being a single woman with 3 young children and still at a vibrant point in my life, hormones very much intact yet, and also sort of this loneliness, and yet always coming back to wanting Christ, and always having these very vivid visions, even though when I was still Protestant, I didn't understand them. One was even before my back surgery in 87, but after my divorce, I had a vision of my I saw myself, and this gold light was coming down over me. I just saw from here up, gold light coming down, and then above my head formed just a gold band, a wide gold band, this light coming down from it, golden light. And then above that golden band was a beautiful ring with a cut gemstone, sort of a pinkish orchid. And out from it were 12 gold rays that came out like the sun, just all around this beautiful cut gem. And on the tips of each of those gold rays were little diamond ships. And it wasn't until after I was Catholic and understood more, and even had the espousal of my soul in 1988, I never shared that vision with Dr. H or with anyone else till now. And I understood it, and I had visions since that were more with the betrothal and preparing me for matrimony with Christ spiritual. That even back then, when I was still being sort of wooed, tricked by this older man who had, was involved, was engaged, and it was terrible, and I didn't know at the time. But yeah, the Lord was saying, I want you for myself. And I wasn't ready yet in the worldly sense, in the temporal sense, and in the very human, womanly sense to quite give up the hope of an earthly husband and also just being in pain all the time. Would have helped in some ways, I thought, but in reality, I realized no, it wouldn't have helped at all. With this pain level, a lot of times, I can barely cope with anyone around. No movements, no noises, whatever. And I wouldn't give up my life in Christ for anything now. But anyway, I'm just trying to explain the process. And maybe this is why, too, I get concerned about a very, very young women who think they want to be hermits, or maybe feel they're called. Maybe they are called. I don't know. I question that. Because there's still so much about us yet that needs to be worked through to really make an informed decision to give our wills totally over to God's will, and then to take what He gives. This is the poem, though, that I wrote at that time period. Just how hard it was back and forth, knowing I wanted something more in God, and yet hard to cut the body, to cut the feelings and the desires of the flesh. I called it involution. It is difficult to express here the sadness I feel. My mind knows and understands the reason for the pain. My mind can even see the reflection as from the illusion cast in the mirror, and I can see myself as an expression of striving for love and completion. The loving way I am being shaped is only pain from my material perspective. I create the pain by the conflict of matter crushing matter. It is so hard to completely and fully give over when I so passionately and earnestly cry out to God to use me, to take me, that I am His. Then I go through more testing and pain and sadness because there is still in my physicalness a resistance to being formed in the way I am to become. Being pulled and involuted may take years, a lifetime even. To lose oneself is difficult when oneself has been close on one's heels. It is like a shadow attempting to lose a body. That's exactly what it's like. My body is a dead weight to my soul at times. So I would know, and yet I would continue um, seeking human love or dreaming about that. It really wasn't until 1996 that I had the full release and relinquishment of that desire. In fact, what had happened was so much that I was, well, I'll tell you about it maybe in the next video post or another one at some point in time. Maybe next I'll go back more into the time of letting go in the marriage. But by the last man that I thought, I mean, I knew I didn't really love him, but it was such a temptation and very hard because I was so suffering physically and so needy. And life was hard without that human companionship and attention and even to be held. Just to be held. Have someone's arms give you a hug. But by the time that, and I knew, get me out of this, Lord, sometime, and I couldn't. I was just so hard. It's a real tearing away and a decision. And his real presence was so patient with me and would let it all be how I needed it to be, but yet would always have himself close so that I would always desire him. And of course, he won out, my desire for him. That desire comes from early on, from childhood even. And so finally, even at another point, I said, oh, Lord, no more men troubles, no more men troubles. And when one morning, it was after I was Catholic, just a year, when finally I totally gave up on and did not want any more human, mortal involvements or even desires or dreams of marriage in a temporal way. But I remember one morning after Mass, and I was just back and forth and torn. This man, calling and visiting and whatever. And finally I just said, oh, Jesus, how can you still love me when I'm like this? And he right away said, because you're so pathetic. So true. Anyway, thanks for bearing with me. And if you don't like hearing about the process, I know you read about these things. I've read about them, like with St. Anthony and how he would beat himself and with thorns and rose brambles and then roll in the snow or whatever to try to conquer his feelings of the flesh. And it is quite a process, but it's different for everyone. And mine wasn't so much the yearnings of flesh as much as emotional yearnings for comfort, for a helpmate in this earthly life, even for someone who would help in earthly ways with the house or financially, or just to talk to have an intelligent conversation with. Another adult, another man, a man. So, all very natural, but these are things that in the spiritual life, even if you're married and you desire union with God, you and your spouse need to talk over these things and desire together and decide together, if at all possible, what you wish in your relationship with the Lord, and then live accordingly. God bless His real presence in you.